Our next guest is someone I'm really excited to have on. He writes a lot of NBA content, including features for Sports Illustrated. It's Lee Jenkins. How are you doing, Lee?
Hey guys, how are you?
Good. Thanks a lot for being on. You probably don't know this, but I'm based in D.C., so I got to see a lot of JaVale McGee in the last couple years, and he is a endlessly fascinating player to watch and cover. But he was a very reticent guy in the locker room, which I think people might not have expected from watching him play. Can you talk about getting to know him and to a little degree his family and writing that feature?
It's impossible to get to know him. I mean, he's one of the most reticent athletes I've ever been around, ever talked to. I mean, the story was 2,500 words. I think I talked to him for 5 minutes. You know, every answer practically was a one-word answer. So, you know, that happens sometimes. You know, in baseball, there are a lot of guys like that. Chase Utley's like that. So a lot of it comes from other people, coaches who've been around him. In this case, the guy's mom was just had an electric personality, completely different from her son, and just told a ton of hilarious stories about him.
Yeah, do you think that McGee, my theory on this was that McGee sort of knew we were laughing, or knew that other people, and so he kind of protects himself, I think, by, in his media, you know, as weird as he is on Twitter, in actual interactions with media, he seems to try to protect himself.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right, because it's funny when you get online and you start to look at these like YouTube videos, you know, the Nick and JaVale show, and then you see other videos that he's done. I mean, the guy's got a real personality, and people told me that when you kind of get in with him, he's actually pretty funny. But he shut it down among reporters, and even the beat guys in Washington told me that I had no chance kind of breaking through any sort of wall with him. And I think he shut it down, and a lot of the reason, I think, is what you said. He knows about those jokes. I mean, you're talking about somebody who is so technologically savvy that I bet he sees every one of those videos, every one of those blog posts, and they're probably the reason he's put up some of those walls.
Yeah, well, now he's in a very different situation and in a place where you would imagine he can excel. If he can excel anywhere, it's going to be with George Karl in a system that gives him opportunities the way that the Nuggets will. What do you think? You know, I've heard from people in Washington associated with the team that there was a question of, like, does he just have basketball ADD? Like, can he learn the things he needs to learn? From watching him, where do you fall on that?
Well, I think what's happened to him is he actually worked pretty hard. From what I understand, he works pretty hard in the off season. It's just he works on some of the wrong things. You know, things he doesn't really need to be worrying about. His outside shot, sky hook. You know, I think the Nuggets are a great place for him just because of the development they've had. I mean, they've developed some players pretty well. Flalo, J.R. Smith, Dante Jones, and even the big guys like Mozgov and Kufas have gotten better, you know, since that Carmelo trade. I think most people agree. So I think that and they've devoted this assistant coach, Melvin Hunt, who's in Cleveland, he was with the Lakers, to kind of working with him constantly. You know, they're there 40 minutes before every game. I was there, and the day after they got back from a long road trip, it was like a 2-week trip. They got in at 2:30 in the morning. He was there at 9:30. So I don't think the work ethic is as much a question as it is what you said. It's like, can he get it? You know, and because look, it's been 4 years, and you know, I think Donnie Nelson was told me that 27 is kind of the cutoff for big guys. So he's still a few years away from completely giving up on him, I think. I mean, I think the Nuggets were kind of smart to take the flyer.
Yeah, and such a physical talent, and you know, it's not just that he's huge and he can jump, but his timing can be unbelievable on blocks. One thing I wonder about, with him is I found it really interesting that you wouldn't expect him to have like a coach's son's game. You know, I guess he doesn't have a coach's son's game, which is really bizarre when you find out about his mom. And you're like, well, why can't he drop step and finish it off the backboard with either hand? Like, he's it's weird.
No, you're right. Like you think of Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving and Jeff Teague, all these guys who like came up around the game. We always think of that as somebody who's then going to be fundamentally so sound. And this guy's the complete opposite. And really the reason is he didn't want his mom coaching him. He didn't like how rough she was on him. And so for this huge gap of time, really that fundamental time, early teenage years, he was kind of not playing basketball. I mean, he was sort of refusing to be coached. But Becca, the most interesting thing about him, I thought, was when he was in high school, he was at Detroit Country Day, one of the best basketball high schools.
Right.
And his mom basically decided he wasn't good enough to play, that he couldn't play there. So she took him out and enrolls him in a school with 67 students total in it. So basically, she knew he wasn't even good enough to play for this high-level high school, and that was as a junior. It wasn't even as a freshman or anything. So I think that shows just how far off he was. Just because he grew up with the game, he didn't really play the game. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And it's a complete opposite from maybe a guy who you've also profiled, Andrew Bynum, who came up extremely raw, even in high school, was, had a lot of questions about whether or not he was ever going to be anything but just big, like even athleticism-wise. He's obviously undergone an incredible development into one of the probably top 15 players in the NBA. Where do you describe him and where he's come and what you know about his personality, which we've been seeing to greater and lesser degree coming out in the last, few months?
No, I mean, he's got it's the complete opposite of McGee. Like, I spent 5 minutes with McGee. I probably spent 4 hours with Bynum. I mean, I was like, hanging out with him, went to lunch with him, ran errands with him. And he's got this really unique personality. He's almost nerdy. He'll talk to you about anything. He'll talk about, building computers and about the parts of his car and philosophy. And what's interesting is when I was with him, he was both kind of griping about his role with Phil Jackson, how he wasn't featured enough, but he also seemed really concerned about who was going to replace Phil Jackson and if he would even be sublimated further in the Lakers' plans. This was last April. So it's just interesting to me that Mike Brown has put him in the position Bynum always wanted to be in. He's pretty well featured now after Kobe Bryant and their offense. He's doing all the things he wanted to do, and still he's sort of lashing out. And it feels just like kind of a new superstar, feeling his oats and, constantly trying to push those limits a little bit. But look, when you take the whole Bynum experiment and you put it all into perspective, these little things like the three-pointers and the stupid things he says, you've got to kind of take the good with the bad with the good in that situation. When you just think of, when he was 17, he wasn't even invited to the green room for the draft at Madison Square Garden. He had to buy a ticket. Kareem said he didn't have a single move when he started working with him. He was so far behind. He never led his high school team in points. He never even finished a season with his high school team. To me, it's incredible that the Lakers, who, only pick in the top 10, once every 15 years, they gamble on this kid and it worked out for them. I think he's one of the most remarkable stories in the league.